Çok değerli hanımefendiler, beyefendiler, kıymetli konuklarımız. Afiyet olsun öncelikle efendim. Tekrar salonumuzda buluştuk. Hoş geldiniz, şerefler verdiniz. Efendim bir duyurum olacak. Bugün malum cuma namazını eda etmek isteyen misafirlerimiz için otelimizin 2. katında Manolya salonunda saat 13'te cuma namazını eda edeceğiz. Bu hatırlatmayı yapalım efendim. Birinci oturumumuz Dünya ve Türkiye tahıl piyasaları, üretim ve tahminler ana başlığını taşıyor. Panelimizin sponsoru Aşk Makarna. Kendilerine çok teşekkür ediyoruz ve oturum öncesi Aşk Makarna'nın kısa bir videosunu izliyoruz efendim. Buyursunlar. Video hazır olunca bana bir işaret edin efendim. Ben ondan sonra tekrar anonslayayım. Efendim tabii ki uluslararası konuklarımız bizlerle birlikte olacak. Özellikle bu oturumda dünyanın çeşitli ülkelerinden tahıl piyasasına yön veren kurumların ulusal ve uluslararası anlamda çok stratejik raporlara imza atan ve hepimizin de bu sonuçlardan yararlandığımız çok kıymetli isimler bizlerle birlikte olacaklar. Az önce de ifade etmeye çalıştığım gibi hem ulusal bazda hem de uluslararası alanda bu temsilcilerimizi dinlemek bizler için gerçekten çok verimli, çok güzel olacaktır. Açılış konuşmalarında özellikle hem tahıl piyasaları hem de makarna ile ilgili çok önemli bilgiler de aldık ciddi anlamda ve ülkemizdeki gelişim potansiyelinin değerlendirilmesi açısından hem sorunları hem de çözüm önerilerini ortaya koyan gerçekten ciddi verilerle de süslü konuşmalar dinledik efendim. Sadece açılış seremonisi bile en azından biz gazeteciler için çok ciddi bir haber kaynağı olacaktır ki akşama kadar sürecek panellerde de bizler için çok ciddi içerikler olacak. Hazır mı efendim videomuz? Teşekkür ediyoruz efendim, sağ olunuz. Çok kıymetli isimler bizlerle birlikte ve tabii ki bu tarz panellerde, oturumlarda sürecin hepimizin lehine şeklinde sürenin de en iyi kullanılması açısından ve tabii ki orada akacak bilgiler açısından da moderatörler son derece önemlidir. Kıymetli İrfan Donat kardeşim, Bloomberg HT Tarım Editörü ve sunucusu panelimizi modere edecek. Az sonra kendisini davet edeceğim buraya. Bu kadar uluslararası ölçekte bir panelin de kendisi tarafından modere edilecek olması hepimiz için de ayrı bir şans diyelim efendim ve Aşk Makarna'nın kısa videosunu şimdi izleyelim, buyursunlar.
Bir şehir düşünün. Tarihi taş sokaklarıyla yüzyılların izini taşıyan kadim bir medeniyet. Mezopotamya'nın kalbi, Mardin. İşte biz bu eşsiz şehirde doğduk. 1997 yılında Mardin'in bereketli topraklarında unculukla başladık yolculuğumuza. Yıllar içinde büyüdük, geliştik ve 2010 yılında bu toprakların özünden ilham alarak makarna sektörüne adım attık. Her tanesi Mezopotamya'nın altın buğdayından. Yeni nesil yüksek teknoloji tesislerimizde hiçbir aşamasında el değmeden özenle üretildi. Bugün modern üretim hatlarımızda 80 kişilik uzman kadromuzla yıllık 50.000 ton makarna ve 60.000 ton un üretim kapasitemizle sadece Türkiye değil, Afrika'dan Güney Amerika'ya, Uzak Doğu'dan Avrupa'ya uzanan bir lezzet yolculuğundayız. Aşk Makarna olarak sadece üretmiyoruz. Kaliteyi, güveni ve sürdürülebilirliği sofralara taşıyoruz. Her lokmada bir emek, her pakette bir tutku, her sofrada bir aşk var. Ve biz geleceğe umutla bakıyoruz. Yeni yatırımlarımızla gelecek yıl kapasitemizi %50 artırıyor, daha fazla sofraya ulaşmak için var gücümüzle çalışıyoruz. Aşk Makarna, lezzetin en saf hali.
Panel sponsorumuz Aşk Makarna'ya çok teşekkür ediyoruz efendim. Sağ olsunlar, var olsunlar. Efendim Dünya ve Türkiye tahıl piyasaları, üretim ve tahminler konulu oturumumuzu az önce de anons etmeye çalıştığım gibi Bloomberg HT Tarım Editörü ve sunucusu çok değerli meslektaşım Sayın İrfan Donat yönetecek. Alkışlarla kendisini davet ediyorum efendim.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Çok sağ olun. Eyvallah.
Efendim alkışlarınızla FAO kıdemli ekonomisti Sayın Monika Tatova geliyor. Buyursunlar efendim.
Bakalım.
Efendim İKAR Tarımsal Piyasa Çalışmaları Enstitüsü Direktörü Doktor Dimitri Raiko'yu davet ediyorum alkışlarınızla. Buyurun efendim.
Bakalım.
Astra Emtia Operasyon Direktörü Mısır'dan katılıyor kendisi. Sayın Hayitam Moneim buyursunlar efendim. İK Tarım Üstü Danışmanlık Şirketi kurucusu çok değerli büyüğümüz Sayın İsmail Kemaloğlu buyursunlar efendim. Çok değerli moderatörümüze ve kıymetli panelistlerimize çok teşekkür ediyoruz efendim. Sağ olunuz, var olunuz ve şu dakikadan sonra söz, zaman, tasarrufu, içerik hepsi çok değerli İrfan Donat kardeşim de. Kolaylıklar diliyorum. Sağ ol, var ol.
Çok teşekkür ediyorum Umut. Gerçekten böyle bir etkinlikte bulunmaktan ben de çok mutluyum. Sektörün nabzının tutulduğu en önemli programlardan, organizasyonlardan bir tanesi. Tüm Hubudar yönetimine, Gürsel Bey Başkan'da teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi 2025 hasadına doğru girerken tabii biz dünyada ve Türkiye'de tahılın hem arz, talep ve stok tarafındaki görünümünü fiyatlarla beraber takip ediyoruz. Bunlara dair ipuçlarını almaya çalışacağız ve bu süreç artık bu piyasa sadece üretici ya da tüccarları ilgilendiren bir mesele değil. Uzun zamandır bu işin politika yapıcıları, sanayicileri, finansörleri, yatırımcıları herkes artık daha bu konuda yakın takipte desek yeridir. Ben yaklaşık 13 yıldır aralıksız tarım ve gıda üzerine televizyon programı yapıyorum. Yine benzer dönemde elimizden geldiğince bir şeyler yazmaya, çizmeye çalışıyoruz ama şunu söyleyebilirim. Bu kadar ilginç bir dönemden geçtiğimizi çok hatırlamıyorum. Yani yaşı benden büyük olanlar tabii ki daha fazla tecrübeye sahip ama bu dönem ilginç bir dönem. Bunu hem küresel manada söylüyorum hem Türkiye özelinde söylüyorum. Çünkü artık hani buğday, mısır, arpa bunlar yani bir iklimle, savaşla, efendime söyleyeyim salgın hastalıklarla ya da işte bu işin stratejileriyle gündeme gelmeye başladı. Bu işin merkezinde yer almaya başladı ve hikayeyi biraz geriye sararsak 2022'den bu yana işte Rusya-Ukrayna arasındaki savaş, bunun yarattığı piyasadaki etkiler hepimizin hafızasında. Limanların durumu, işte koridor hikayesi ve küresel gıda sistemi üzerindeki etkilerini konuşuyoruz. Şimdi Karadeniz yeniden hareketli ama burada bir kalıcı istikrardan bahsetmek mümkün mü? Bu sorunun yanıtı artık sadece bir bölgeyi ilgilendirmiyor. Baktığımız zaman Mısır'dan Bangladeş'e, Çin'den Türkiye'ye kadar herkesin radarında. Bitmedi. Bir de tabii şimdi küresel siyaset ve ticarette artık bir Trump gerçeğimiz var. İzlediği politika bize gösteriyor ki bundan sonraki dönemde küresel ticaret deyim yerindeyse kumara döndü. Yani öngörülemezlik arttı, gümrük tarifeleri, işte korumacı yaklaşımlar vesaire. Bunların hepsi şu anda ayrı bir risk desek kenarda bekliyor. Asya ve Afrika tarafına bakıyoruz ki birazdan değerli panelistlerimiz küreselden başlayarak bölgesel bazda ve Türkiye üzerinde bilgiler paylaşacak. Orada bir talep var, bir canlı talep var. Diğer taraftan iklim riskiyle beraber ülkelerin üretim kapasiteleri kırılganlaşıyor ve bu bazen ticareti de canlandırabiliyor, talebi artırabiliyor. Acaba burada gıda güvencesi önümüzdeki dönemde bize neye işaret ediyor? Özellikle Afrika, Asya bölgelerinde. Bu da önemli bir nokta. Ve baktığımız zaman jeopolitik riskler açısından biraz önce Rusya, Ukrayna'yı söyledik ama Çin ve Amerika'nın o güç denge savaşları farklı şekillerde karşımıza çıkıyor. Yani bugün biz Hindistan ve Pakistan'daki o savaşın ilk maalesef yani gerilim diyelim, ben savaş kelimesinde inşallah olmaz, ilerlemez ama konuşmaya başladık. Bu baktığımız zaman salt bir Pakistan-Hindistan hikayesi değil. Çin ve Amerika'nın aslında farklı şekildeki bir mücadelesi diye yorumlasak da yanlış olmaz. Dolayısıyla konuşmacılarımız biraz önce açılış konuşmasında değerli görüşlerini paylaştılar. Orada risklere dikkat çektiler. İklimden tutalım işte jeopolitik risklere kadar farklı meseleler var. İthalat ve ihracattaki o politikalar, izlenen politikalar bugün üreticisinden sanayicisine, ihracatçısına kadar herkese etkiliyor. Türkiye bundan en çok etkilenenlerden ya da buna en çok şahit olan ülkelerden bir tanesi. Rakamlar paylaşıldı ihracat tarafında. Dolayısıyla artık piyasada istikrar kelimesi istisnaya dönmüş durumda. Öngörülemezlik, belirsizlikler ya da dalgalanmalar da artık rutin haline gelmiş vaziyette. Lafı çok uzatmak istemiyorum. Biz zaten hep konuşuyoruz. Ama bugün ben değerli panelistlerin çok kıymetli sunumları var. Onları dinlemek istiyorum sizlerle birlikte. Çünkü güncel veriler eşliğinde bize bir fotoğraf çekecekler. Yani bugün hem büyük resmi göreceğiz hem de dar boğazları, fırsat alanları ve belirsizlikleri biraz belki tartışma fırsatımız olacak gün boyu. Şimdi bu çok katmanlı tabloda önce diyoruz ki bir küreseli çekelim, küreselin fotoğrafını çekelim. Ardından da makrodan mikroya doğru ilerleyelim. O yüzden sözü önce FAO kıdemli ekonomisti Monika Tatova'ya bırakmak istiyorum. Kendisi dünya tahıl piyasalarında mevcut durum ve gelişmeleri bize aktaracak ki FAO bildiğiniz üzere bizler de çok yakından takip ediyoruz. Küresel gıda fiyatlarını her ay düzenli olarak yayınlıyor ve o gıda endeksine baktığımız zaman 5 alt grubu var biliyorsunuz. Tahıl grubu, bitkisel yağ, et, süt ve şeker grubu. Ama oradaki tahıl sadece tahıl olarak algılamamak lazım. Baktığımız zaman et ve süt tarafını dahi etkileyen sonuçta bir ham madde üretiliyor hayvancılık sektörü açısından. Çok kırılgan dengelere sahip. Dolayısıyla kendisi hem işin küresel gıda fiyatları tarafı hem girdi maliyetleri tarafından yola çıkarak güncel bir sunum yapacak. Dinliyoruz. We are ready to listen to you. Thank you.
The microphone is on. Yes, good morning. Okay. Thank you, Irfan, for your warm welcoming words. It's a pleasure to be in Ankara. It's a pleasure to get to know your association even more and to participate as a first speaker in this segment about the world grain markets. Turkey is an important player on the world grain markets, but there are many more qualified people in the rooms to talk about the developments. So instead, I will focus on what is happening on the global grain markets globally to set the scene. First, a few words about where I'm coming from. I am a senior economist with FAO, and I also serve as a secretary of a agriculture market information system. You might or might have not heard about the agriculture market information system. It is a G20 initiative that was set up in 2011 following the price hikes of 2008 and 2010. In fact, those were also interesting times. We lived back then. In 2008, 2010, when the prices were going off the roof. But again, we are in this period that is highly uncertain. So, more than ever, it is important to discuss what is happening on the market fundamentals, and how different policies are impacting what is happening. So, the AMIS is part of the G20 initiative. Turkey as a G20 is a very actively participating member of the AMIS. We follow 4 basic commodities: wheat, maize, rice, and soybeans. Later we added also vegetable oils and fertilizers, but here the coverage is different. Depending on the commodity, the share is at least 80% of the production that is covered by AMIS. I invited you to explore the AMIS Outlook website, which contains information that is updated 10 times per year. We take a break in January, we take a break in August, but the AMIS Market Monitor, which you can subscribe to, will provide you with the latest global estimates of supply, demand, trade, and stocks globally, and also for the participating members, and will compare those estimates from FAO, IGC, and the United States Department of Agriculture. I also lead a team that deals with the price analysis and the short-term forecast in FAO. So the actual presentation, although we are on a grain conference, I will start by talking about the total evolution of the world food commodity prices. We had the COVID-19 pandemic, which started in 2020. We had the start of the war in Ukraine. Now we are experiencing some policy adjustment, policy changes, risk of retaliation. And to look at all this, FAO uses a matrix of a food price index, which was introduced in 1996. And it looks at the cereals, vegetable oils, sugar, meat, and dairy products, 24 commodities, 95 price quotation across time, to get an idea how the world food commodity prices are developing. So from right away, the prices started increasing already in May 2020, but you will see, they showed me how to do this, a peak in 2022. This was right at the start of the war in Ukraine, and then gradual easing of this world food price index. Since about February, the index started slowly but steadily increasing again, and has been continuing increasing since then. Overall, as of April, we are on the level similar to March, but we are about 20% below the peak, which was reached in March 2022. And we are this is about 8% higher than it was in 2023. An interesting picture to look at is this picture on the other side, because you will notice that across cereals, the situation is relatively stable. Now here, it's a measure of all cereals, so they will be wheat, maize, sorghum, barley, rice. They are mutually offsetting each other, but you will see that similarly the meats are relatively stable, but the dairy prices are practically increasing linearly, and also there have been big jumps in the vegetable oil prices. The vegetable oil prices, despite plenty of soybeans in the world, as I will mention a little bit later, are to the large part driven by palm oil prices. The palm oil prices, which usually are lower than the other oils, so that would be soybeans, rapeseed, and sunflower oil, since about last 6-9 months, they have actually been trading at a premium compared to these other vegetable oils. Recently, this premium was erased just a little bit. So it is you can call them all the plantations in Indonesia and Malaysia that are actually driving this price increase. So let's now, before we move to the grain market, where are we in terms of global picture? Let's just look at the nominal terms. You will see that in the nominal terms we have declined from the peaks where we were in 2022, but are still at levels that are relatively high. So with that, let's move to the cereal market, since we are here on a conference to talk about cereals. This, I will talk in details about different cereals, but this is a situation for cereals as an aggregate. So, the prices have, as an aggregate, declined. You will notice those are pictures for the 2024, not for 2025. I will speak about the 2025 wheat in greater detail, because that's what we can talk about now, 2025 wheat. There is not much to talk about the 2025 maize production yet, but you will notice that the production has declined compared to the previous year. The production remains lower than the utilization. This is mostly driven by a decline in the maize production globally in 2024, mostly on weather-induced changes, which means that the closing stocks are going to be lower than we started with. In the trade, there is a decline, noticeable decline, but here changes. There is a decline in wheat and in decline in maize trade globally, but the rice trade has increased. So here, those two parameters are offsetting each other. Let's now move a little bit in a great detail to the wheat production. In 2024, the wheat production increased slightly compared to the 2023, but it remains lower than the record of 2022. A big decline was the reduced production in Europe, mostly in the EU, based on the unfavorable weather conditions. Production also declined in Russia year on year, keeping in mind that in the previous year the production was exceptional. So at this point, we can say a few words about the expectations for the 2025 harvest, especially as the winter crops in Northern Hemisphere now give us a pretty good idea of how things are going. We are starting with the production forecast globally for the 2025 on a level similar to 2024, but with large regional differences. So we are expecting an output of about 795 million tons. The actual number is not important. What is important is comparing it with the historical trends and trends in utilization and trade. So in Europe, after a rather decimated forecast in 2024, we are expecting that improved weather conditions will boost the yield expectations, but there are significant differences between the southern part of the EU and the northern part of the EU. The southern part, the prospects have increased slightly because of the beneficial rainfall. In the north, you still have concerns about the dry condition and warmer than usual temperature, which does pose a certain risk for the yields. In the UK, the farmers planted more than average, so we are expecting an improved harvest compared to last year, but here too we are watching closely what is going to happen with the higher than average temperature, which happened in the past few weeks. I understand from a friend who is there right now that this is a history now because it's really cold. So, moving to, I will leave the discussion on the Black Sea to Dmitry, but in North America, in US, there are pockets of drought, so we are closely watching those. And in Canada, the main spring planting season is currently underway. So we are expecting that it's likely to be similar to the last year. As always, in the Northern Africa region, there are concerns about as always, there are concerns about the drought, with the exception of Egypt, which is mostly irrigated. So in Egypt, wheat production is stable year on year, while when we talk about the other parts of North Africa, with the production that is rain-fed, there we observe very significant variability. And also this year in Morocco, we are expecting that the production is going to not be as good, is going to be affected by the drought. In the southern hemisphere, the winter wheat plantings are underway, so there is not much to say at that point. We're expecting some recovery in Argentina and about the average harvest in Australia. So With that, the wheat use is usually stable. What changes in the wheat utilization, the food use is driven by the population increases. So the increases you notice in the food use will be driven how the population develops, but it is the feed use that is being the variable. And why is that? Because the farmers will decide whether they are going to feed more wheat or feed more coarse grains depending on the price. At this point, the maize prices are higher, so they might be tempted to eventually be feeding more wheat. Overall, the world wheat stocks are seen as declining in 24-25, especially among the major exporters, and the world wheat rate is expected to decline. The wheat prices started to slow down, they decline, but the rate of decline has been slower than it was in the past. Now, whether this is good news or bad news depends on who you are. If you are producing wheat, then obviously you would like your prices to be at a certain level, right? So you can recover your cost. It also depends on the cost of your inputs. If you are an importing country on the importing it, then you probably are enjoying when the prices are lower. But again, the price you pay as an importing country will depend on a range of factors, including the exchange rate. More of that in a little bit. When we look at the barley market is really small. If we spoke about 800 million tons of wheat production per year globally, barley we can get to 155, 160 on a good year. The barley prices, the production declined, but the increase in barley prices was also supported by the increases in the maize prices. If we move to maize, here the situation is slightly different, mostly because the production, the production has declined, particularly in the main producing countries of US, Argentina, Ukraine, Russia, and the EU, and the consumption is outpacing the production. So, despite a decline in trade, the stocks are going to decrease, possibly highly likely driven by reduction in maize inventories in China. If we look at what is happening so far about the 2025, we can say something about the southern hemisphere. In Brazil, the price prospects were quite good, so there was an increase in the area. We are expecting most of the Brazil, the production was quite good, so the maize production in Brazil is going to increase and it's going to be about the last year average. In Argentina, we are talking about the below-average harvest, mostly because of the decline in production, as the farmers were worried that the maize stand disease and the leafhoppers and other diseases might come and play, and they chose to plant something else. Other important player in South Africa is South Africa, where the previous year production was quite decimated, but now we are expecting recovery this year. US, a big producer, is planting as we speak. Here it is important to see many farmers in the areas where maize can be grown, can also grow soybeans. There are plenty of soybeans in the world, so they are deciding whether they are going to plant more maize or more soybeans. Right now, it seems also in light of possible trade tensions that they might be inclined to increase plantings of maize as opposed to soybeans. Let me just briefly show you the picture of the global rice market because it looks very different from what we saw so far. And here, worth mentioning is this red bit right here, which shows that the international prices in 2025 stood at the lowest level since April 2022. and they declined since October 2024, mostly influenced by the removal of export restrictions by India. Good harvest in the northern hemisphere, and then some currency movements. So the rice prices are decreasing, still the production is expected to increase. Why is that? Well, because when the farmers planted the rice, the prices were quite beneficial. Looking at the soybeans, which I mentioned, does impact the decision of the US farmers on how much they are going to plant maize. The production in 24-25 is expected to increase, driven mostly by favorable production outlook in South Africa. Brazil's harvest is expected to be another record high level. So there is a still solid demand, driven mostly by vegetable oil to be used in the biodiesel industry. How much of this is actually going to stay, because a large part of it comes from the US, it is to be seen how the biodiesel policies in the US are going to develop. So this is the type of chart that you will see in our market monitor, which gives you a very quick snapshot of the crop condition globally of these main crops. The green means favorable, the red means there is some concerns, the gray color means we are out of season, as seen by maize, there is a lot of out of season there, and partially rice and also soybeans in the northern hemisphere. So, what is the latest looking into the 2025? For wheat, in the northern hemisphere, dry weather remains a concern in parts of Europe, Russian Federation, Ukraine, US, possibly also Turkey. Maize harvesting is continuing in the southern hemisphere as sowing picks up the speed in the northern hemisphere. For the rice, harvesting in South America and South and Southeast Asia, harvest is favorable. Sowing is progressing in China, EU, and the US. Soybeans, similarly to maize, harvesting in the south. The blue means excellent condition of Brazilian soybeans. And sowing begins on the northern hemisphere. Let me tell you also something about the fertilizer prices. We spoke a lot about the crops, but what is important is how much farmers are paying for the fertilizers. So the overall price picture right here, you will notice that the phosphate has increased. There have been some changes also for the nitrogen and potash, but there have been significant increases in the phosphate prices. Overall, all prices have increased and they are now at 2-year highs, which is not particularly worrisome. We are not there yet in the peak. But these changes in the fertilizer prices need to be looked at through the lens of the farmer. How is the farmer, how much farmer can sell the crop when he buys those expensive fertilizers? So when we talk about some of those higher levels right here, also the crop prices at which the farmer was realizing its harvest were quite elevated. So what we speak about are not necessarily only these price differences, they are important too, but their relationship with the commodity prices. So here we speak about affordability ratios, and those affordability ratios with relatively declining prices, again, depends on the commodity and location. These affordability ratios have been deteriorating in the past few months. So it is something to keep in mind is the relationship between the input prices and the output prices. So to conclude, I will spend my last 2 minutes, I see here, on challenges and threats to the global commodity markets. I understand there will be a session that will discuss the macroeconomic development in great details. So here on 2 slides, I listed a few of them. They should not be considered to be listed in the order of importance. They are all equally important. But certainly we are now maybe more than before, concerned about the macroeconomic risks. There are some estimates. The World Bank increased the estimates of the global economic growth. A few months ago, IMF had something out. But regardless what figure I put there, it is important to know that there is heightened policy uncertainty and adverse trade policy shift, geopolitical tension, persistent inflation, and climate-related natural disasters that all have impact on these macroeconomic factors. The global growth will also influence the exchange rate, globally, the food commodities and also other commodities are quoted in US dollar. How the US dollar changes vis-a-vis other currencies will have impact how much a country as an importing country is paying for the imports. So it is something to keep an eye about. There is a lot of uncertainty. The macroeconomic, the economic growth will have impact on the energy prices. Energy prices will have impact on the fertilizer prices we talked about, but there is also a relationship with the demand for the biofuel feedstocks. So, again, something to watch. Going to the last, there are plenty of climate-related risks. I noticed that in the opening session, a lot of speakers related to the climate-related risk, to the weather-related risk, and how they are going to impact the production. We speak about the rainfall distribution, but more and more we also speak about the high temperatures. And the timing when those high temperatures occurs has significant implications for the crop development. High temperature is one thing, but contrary to popular belief, it is also true that with these higher temperatures, the crops are emerging and developing earlier. And what this means that if you have a late frost, and it can happen, the impact of damages of this late frost is going to be more damaging to the crop than it would have been otherwise. So actually there is still an increased risk of the frost damage despite higher temperatures. It impacts also the spread of pests and diseases globally. There are different impacts on different crops. I like to give the example how cereals are grown across the globe, whether we like it or not, right? So it is unlikely that you would have a crop failure globally, even if a crop fails in a particular region, but this is not the case for the cocoa, coffee, tea, olive oil, which are grown in a very regionally constrained areas. And that also, maybe you follow, maybe not, the developments in the cocoa prices and how much chocolate costs these days. I also listed changes in the policies, including trade, logistical disruptions. Last year we spoke a lot about the Panama Canal, about the Suez Canal, about the implications of these two bottlenecks. The situation has stabilized, but considering that 80% of the grain and oilseeds trade passes through the maritime route, it is something to keep an eye on. Last, but certainly not least, then is the impact on the conflict and the wars via direct impact on agricultural assets, but also how they impact the demand for that product. With that, Mr. Chair, I would finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the information you share with us. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz Monika'ya. Küresel fotoğrafı, mevcut görünümün fotoğrafını çektik. Şimdi biraz daha bölgesel bazda konuya bakacağız. İKAR Tarımsal Piyasa Çalışmaları Enstitüsü Direktörü Doktor Dimitri Rilko bize Rusya ve Karadeniz bölgesine tahıl arz ve talep durumunu stokla beraber muhtemelen bir fotoğrafını çekecek ki Rusya'nın tahıl üretimi, daha doğrusu Karadeniz bölgesi ülkeleri, yani Rusya, Ukrayna vesaire, o bölgedeki tahıl üretimi ve ihracatı, küresel ticaretteki ağırlığı hepimizi çok yakından ilgilendiriyor ve Rusya'nın da tahıl ihracat stratejisi salondaki birçok Rusya ile iş yapan ithalatçılar için de belki bir ipucu olacak bugün Dimitri'nin paylaşacağı bilgiler. Dimitri, we are ready to listen to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Today is a great celebration in my country. It's 80 years anniversary of Victory Day. This is a holiday with tears in our eyes. Nobody knows exactly, but officially, according to official estimates, Soviet Union lost 27 million people in this war. But life continues, and today we discuss very peaceful items. It's grains, and I am very glad to be back again in this beloved Turkish audience. I will talk about Russian grain export mechanism, ongoing organizational restructuring of our export markets, ending stocks in new crop, farm to port economics, and a little bit on flour milling. First of all, probably it's one of most important slides. It shows monthly Turkish wheat import, but everybody knows that it's a little bit misleading because Turkey in reality imported, even this season when it was officially prohibited, Turkey, not prohibited but restricted, Turkey imported about 2.5 million tons of wheat, which were put into bonded warehouses in the ports. I don't know how much exactly was utilized, but we believe that a big portion of this wheat is still located in port warehouses. So Russia was, is, and will be dominant wheat exporter to this country. That's why I want to show you a little bit about, explain motivation and how Russian export mechanism is functioning right now, so that Turkey is part of Russian market and Russia is part of Turkish market. So we must understand each other very well. Just to draw your attention that up until middle of January, despite very compact crop of this season, we exported record high amount of wheat and all grains. So that by the end of first half of the year, Russia already exported 29 million tons of wheat, and the remaining was only about 12 million, something like this. So as of today, basically our export sounds as exhausted, and probably we never ever exported so much by the end of April as now. So why, amid this compact crop, Russia was so eager to export record high amounts of wheat and all grains in first half of the season? I give you three explanations for this. First is exporters' expectation of modest export quotas for the period of February 15, June 30. As you probably know, Russia has export quotas mechanism. Second is floating export duties in combination with export quotas. And third is elevation of central bank key rate and following elevation of commercial banks deposits rate. So if to take first factor, it totally realized. The export quota was given only for 10,600,000 tons, and actual fulfillment of this quota is expected to be 9 million tons, and that's all. So exporters were right when they were hurry with exporting as much as possible in the first half of the season. Then floating export duties in combination with the second half of the season export quotas, how they work. Let's look at this funny diagram. It's monthly present value of our wheat in south of Russia. So it's wheat, cost of wheat, price of wheat deducted with cost of storage and finance. Okay, we deduct each month cost of storage and finance and calculate monthly present value. And as you can see, with these three thick lines, which reflect our time from introduction of export duties. Each and every season, south of Russia and all other regions, this is just example of south of Russia, but other regions follow, we have same issue. The longer you store the wheat, the longer you store the grain, the bigger losses you have. Because of export duties. They are higher when price goes higher, and they are lower when price goes lower. So export duties, they consume basically traditional premium, storage premium, which has everybody in the world, but not in Russia right now. And so this combination of this floating export duty, which discourage storage, with great encouragement which received our farmers, because now you may sell your wheat and your grain in the beginning of the season, put your money into bank deposit and get 20, 25, up to 25% interest rate, which is higher than inflation. So it created great motivation for domestic producers and domestic holders of grain to get rid of it as quick as possible, to put money into bank deposit and to enjoy your money income. And the issue is that as of today, all three factors, they may continue to work from the beginning of 25-26 season. That's why it's important to keep them in mind. Now a little bit on our grains and pulses shipments by channels. As you can see, and as probably many of you know, 75-80% of our grains goes through two channels. It's Black Sea and Port Kavkaz transshipment station. Just diminishing role of direct coasters business, which is focused mostly on Turkey due to obvious reasons. Then a lot of grain comes to Caspian right now. Baltics, in Baltics we have a pretty interesting story. We have two greatest ports, grain terminals, which in 1 year or two will be able to ship 15 million tons of our grains annually, 15 million tons of grains annually. We have possibility of construction of third terminal, which will add another 4 million. So it will be 15 to 19 million tons to be shipped, capacity to be shipped from Baltics, whereas now, even if we take all Baltic states ports, Russia never exported through all this channel more than 4 million tons. So it looks like if we don't have enough production in nearest future in our country, we are going to face era of underloading and overcapacity in our port infrastructure, which is probably good for suppliers because Russia has world highest export tariffs, as you know, forbidden tariffs in ports, but not very good for export infrastructure people because they will be underloaded. A little bit on our organization of our export industry. Here is Black Sea Terminals grain exporters shares, and as you can see, after disappearance of Reef, famous Reef, which was basically number 1-2 exporter from the Black Sea, we have suddenly emerged up to 10 new exporters, relatively new exporters. It was an unexpected phenomenon for those who planned to grab Reef's share. In reality, it was initially grabbed by newcomers, and it dramatically sharpened our competition because instead of 10 companies, we suddenly found on the Black Sea, we suddenly found 15 to 17 of them. And then now, this is last column, it's era of quota, export quota, and it works in such a way that the benefits, not the benefits, but some advantage is got by those who have vertical infrastructure. And here is Grain Gates and OZK, who control a big part of our vertical infrastructure. And as you can see, after introduction of export quotas, more than 70% of export is attributed only to two companies, which is Grain Gates and OZK. And approximately the same story happens in second biggest export channel. It's Port Kavkaz. We have one dominant player here after disappearance of Reef. Not dominant, but major. It's our famous Aston. So Aston market share increased quite dramatically, but see that only four companies control more than 90% of all shipments from Port Kavkaz. So new season contours. It's swing. It's a great swing. Russia entered the winter with worst winter wheat condition ever during maybe last 15 years. Worst winter wheat condition. Then we were lucky enough to have very mild and warm, cool, and weather with high precipitation. So our winter conditions improved quite dramatically. Then, most recently, we have had 2 weeks of very dry weather. It is reflected here in Russia, Ukraine, parts of Rostov, northern Krasnodar, Crimea, new territories, and central black soil, South Volgograd, etc. And then it will be, which is very dangerous, 2 weeks. But then, and plus most recent frost. So this combination of 2 weeks of dryness with most recent frost creates pretty dangerous situation in south of Russia, parts of northern Ukraine, central black soil, Voronezh, Belgrade, Kursk, when leaf apparatus, as our agronomists say, was a little bit damaged in some fields, and even flag leaf was a little bit damaged. And then we are going to have, and it already started yesterday, we are going to have pretty good portion of rains, which must again improve the situation. So it's real swing, and as you can imagine, analysts have pretty difficult times to understand what is going to happen and how to predict the crop when it changes dramatically from week to week. But again, this next 14 days, they promise very good portion of rains across Ukraine, new territories, and Western Russia, and it must improve the situation. Then, about regional wheat supply for new season. We end 24-25 with very, if not extremely low carry out across European Russia. Very slow, if not extremely low across European Russia. But we are going to have pretty good crop, up to date. About 35 million in South plus Caucasus. It's higher than last year. It's up to date. In Central last year was in disastrous situation because of frosts. Yeah, Central must improve. It will be not a great crop, but still pretty decent. In Volga, we're going to have probably lesser crop than last year, and Siberia, Urals and Siberia, I guess you are not greatly interested in Urals and Siberia. So, if we are right, it gives us the following breakdown of regional wheat export surplus. As we are very low in carry-out stocks, old crop stocks, even this addendum of crop will not give us enough. Will not give us enough export surplus. So it will be just a little bit higher in the south, just a little bit higher in central, lower in Volga, and probably you're not that greatly interested in Urals and Siberia. Again, it is based on our current calculations, which of course still can change during next month and a half. And it gives us about 41 million tons of export in comparison with approximately 40 million tons for this season, and it gives us some modest carryouts. And all for all grain, it is still. I even don't load you with corn and barley and peas and other items because it's still highly premature to talk about them. For pea, we see approximately the same, close to record high sowing. Partly it is already damaged by most recent frost, but for pea we still think that it will be close to record high production in south of Russia at least. So we see 53 million tons of total export in comparison with about 50 million this season. Ukraine, it's again, this swing is, it's very difficult to talk Ukraine right now because again, there were signs of dryness there, followed by big and good portion of rains, and we must absorb, digest how this portion of rains will, whether it will greatly improve the situation or slightly improve the situation. So up to date, we still believe that Ukraine is able to produce more than last season, 22.5 million tons. Maybe it's too much, but we still believe that they will be able. And it provides us with 17 million tons of export because carry out from this season will be very low. Ukraine loaded to export markets as much as they could. Corn, very premature to talk about corn in Ukraine. It's our moderately optimistic scenario for Ukraine. 28.5 million tons production and 25 million tons of export. A little bit on Kazakhstan and Central Asia. Up until last season, Russia, Eastern Russian regions, such as Urals and Siberia, they were mostly oriented to Kazakhstan and Central Asia markets. But this season, Kazakhstan started from very high crop, record high crop. We estimated at 16.5 million tons. Official Kazakh figures are 2 million tons higher, but we don't believe in this figure. So we think it is, but it's still 16.5 million is still very high level of production. So Kazakhs, from the very beginning of the season, they stopped officially, banned Russian export to Kazakhstan. Russia retaliated, so it was type of trade conflict. Anyway, this season, as you can see, Russia is basically out of Kazakh market. We sell a little bit to Turkmenistan, a little bit to Uzbekistan. to other countries, but not basically to Kazakhstan. And Kazakhs sell just a little bit to Russia. So for Kazakhstan, we believe that next season, after this record high production, will be lower production level. We see that Kazakhs will probably cut their wheat area by up to 1 million hectares for the benefit of other crops such as barley, because Iranians, as you probably know, they're crazy about Kazakh barley, and the prices on barley are very high right now, in this record high in Kazakhstan. Barley, flaxseed, etc. Coming back to our region, if we are right, and if we have dramatic addendum of production in European Union, neighboring Bulgaria and Romania, they promise close to record high wheat crop. We have much higher production and supply, export supply from Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union, which creates quite a tough market for exporters. Monica already showed you this great descending, which we observed for last basically 2 years. And here is a very important, I guess, very interesting slide, which shows, it reflects May 5 situation, but it does not change dramatically, but it's very important, I guess. So green line is what was actual figures for last season. It is motif, famous motif, yeah? Actual figures for last season, 24. Brown light below them, it's figures for new season, 25, fixed on April, beginning of April. And lowest figure is what is fixed by motif for new crop right now. So we see that in dollars, it is in dollars, it is not in euro. Dollar is approximately 6-7% lower to euro from the beginning of the season, yeah? And you see that price in dollars went down quite dramatically, and we start new season with this crop, this availability, potential availability, and potential prices. So these potential prices are very good for importers, but we must know that the importers, buyers, all wheat buyers, they hate the situation when price on wheat goes down. They hate the situation when price on wheat goes down. They love the situation when price of wheat gradually goes up, yeah, not down. So it is challenge not only for sellers, it is challenge for buyers too. So if we are right and the new crop is estimated so low, and it may go to basically $230, Russians don't surrender at all at this level, because it sounds to us with this ruble. Look what happened with ruble under Trump, yeah, from the beginning of 25, yeah. Ruble strengthened quite dramatically. For Russians to sell at 230 right now is a real disaster. Real disaster. And here is our wheat, new wheat crop netback if we have current scenario, which is 82 rubles per dollar and $230 per FOB Black Sea. It provides this blue figures is approximate cost of production per ton. So it provides apparently some profit for South Russian producers, but believe me, this some profit for South Russian producers sounds as very low in comparison with previous years. Very low in comparison with previous years. And it provides loss for the rest of Russian producers. Here you can see later, if you wish, four different scenarios under different ruble and different FOB prices. But I would say that only one scenario, when FOB provides $280 and ruble to US is 105, is more or less workable, satisfactory for Russian producers. A little bit, it's a little bit on the final statement on Russian flour. As you can see, Russian flour production goes down after a very impressive several years increase. Why? Because mostly because our export goes down. By the way, we predicted more than a year ago. We predicted that our export of flour will go down, and nobody believed. And now they call me and tell Dmitry, you were right. Dmitry, you were right. Okay. Quite disastrous flour milling operational margins in Russia right now, because export provided pretty good margin, and now it is not that impressive. With export duty, I showed this, continue to show this slide, which explains what happens when export duty is down. Wheat flour export is down too. Yeah, it's down too. But it's not only because of this, but because of great crop in Kazakhstan, which cuts our export to Central Asia. It is because of extremely capricious Chinese market. So there are many reasons, not only this one. So if we compare wheat flour export from August to March, this season, we will see that Russia is quite dramatically down. Kazakhstan is a little bit down, and Turkey is quite dramatically down. And there is only one winner, I guess, it's Egypt. We still don't have final figures for this country, for export from flour export from this country, but Egypt suddenly becomes great flour exporter. Teşekkür. Just wanted to invite you to our. Okay.
Thank you very much
Yes.
for the information you shared with us. Dimitri gerçekten kapsamlı bir şekilde özellikle Karadeniz bölgesi açısından Rusya odaklı olarak bize fotoğrafı çekti. Şimdi Astra Emtia Operasyon Direktörü Haytım Monemi dinleyeceğiz. Kendisi Asya, Orta Doğu ve Afrika bölgeleri tahıl piyasalarını bize biraz özetleyecek. Gıda arz güvenliği çerçevesinde bu meseleye bakacak. Hatta ülke bazında biraz da Mısır'ın piyasa konumunu merak ediyoruz. Kendisi muhtemelen paylaşacaktır. Hem işin üretim hem de dış ticaret tarafındaki dengelerini.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity. And I hopefully it's my first time. Hopefully, not be my last time after this presentation. So I guess it's one of the things that I need to set the tone for my presentation is the perspective and the angle. I guess there is a great book that we need, at least I think it's a great book to check, is Prisoners of Geography. I think what we are witnessing now is simply another case of all countries, this kind of how we are prisoners to geography in terms of resources or just a defined space. Having said so, I guess food and grains going forward should be traded as a political commodity. It's not only just to cover the welfare or to feed the people. It's changing, and I guess we are facing a new norms. So in my perspective, I need to highlight this side of how the grain markets could change. So over the next 15 to 20 minutes, I will offer a structured overview for global wheat trade dynamics, layering not just market fundamentals, but the political economy-driven trade fragmentation. are placing spotlight on structural import nations like Egypt and other countries, in particular sub-Saharan countries, where food security is deeply intertwined with foreign exchange policy and subsidies, and most important in my view, the geopolitical alignment. One of the things as well, we are entering a new era where tariff policies, sanctions, and logistical choke points can ripple across the supply chain and transform anything from fertilizer availability, machinery pricing, and even insurance on premiums. Understanding grain markets in 2025 and beyond is, and not just only about analyzing tonnages, it means explaining them into leading indicators of fiscal health, social stability, and international power. So grains are just a food, they are currency, leverage, and policy instruments of finance and financial leverage and policy instruments. In much of the global south, where wheat, coarse grains are the backbone of both household consumption and government legitimacy. When wheat prices rise, central banks face inflationary pressure, ministries of finance confront subsidies overruns, and the government, especially in fragile states, risk social unrest. This is not hypothetical. We have witnessed this firsthand in Arab Spring, during Sri Lanka debt crisis, and most recently in West Africa. The structural role of grains in economic policy is now compounded by two accelerating trends. One, the weaponization of food trade, where export bans and tariff shocks are used as geopolitical tools. The erosion of multilateral grain governance, leaving importers exposed to fragmented bilateral negotiations. The modern grain importer must now be both buyer and strategist. I keep emphasizing about the importer given our acute case in Egypt. Egypt roughly import like 60 to 65% of their needs. So it's always a critical balance for the country to maintain this. Just to give you a small fact about how the Egyptians perceive bread. Bread in Arabic, and I guess a lot of know aware of this, called aish. And the literal kind of translation of aish is life. So for Egyptians in particular, we consider bread is another definition of life. So one thing that we keep always maybe sometimes get confused or drag into small details, we are just focused on the immediate terms, just now. However, if we have this kind of more holistic kind of views about how the things change, how the things evolved, we need to understand this. Yes, sometimes we have a good season. Yes, sometimes a bad season. Whatever you stand as importer or as exporter. However, the reality is that the foundational shift since 2020-21, that the global grain system has flopped from surplus to deficit. Consumption now outpaces production year after year. That shift introduced structural fragility. It means grain markets no longer carry cushion to absorb shocks, which was another few examples, whatever the Russian-Ukraine conflict, the disruption of the Suez Canal. So we are moving on a very thin ice, which is, again, keep repeating after time, and with the new kind of, hopefully, not sustainable long trend of, this kind of tariff wars, we try hopefully to avoid further escalations. China, and it's also the shifts in introducing this kind of structural fragility and any kind of disruption, whatever droughts, bad season, we don't have any margin for error. It also reconfigures global power. Countries with surplus not only gain leverage in terms of pricing, but again in terms of diplomacy as well. And we have a lot of examples about this. My basic idea is this is no longer just a question of output. It's a question of access, affordability, and agility. This mainly, again, because wheat is, I cannot cover all grains. I don't think you have much time for me to cover all grains, but if you focus about the grains in particular, and this slide shows the strategic mismatch that shape the global vulnerability. Wheat production is regionally concentrated, while the consumption is geographically dispersed. So keep re-emphasizing why the geography, our presence of geography is, in my opinion, is paramount. China, India, and Russia account over 40% of a global wheat output, but they are also significant consumers. Often limiting their export capacity, this duality creates bottlenecks. For instance, if China's strategic stockpiling and India export bans simply decide to take such action, that will affect global availability even when the harvests are strong. Meanwhile, net importing regions in MENA, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Southeast Asia are home to growing population with rising wheat dependency. We keep always forgetting this. Our dietary system keep changing. And again, with the Monica account presentation, we show how the price of rice keep falling. This is an indicator. So amid the short-term distortion and focus on the big picture, we are witnessing a significant change. This spatial asymmetry means trade corridors, maritime stability, and price-setting powers matter more than ever. Grain security in Cairo or Lagos, it's increasingly hinged on a decision taking place in Moscow, Beijing, or Canberra. Countries in demand regions must therefore design procurement strategies not just around price, but around reliability, flexibility, and origin diversification. Moving now to the exporter and importer nations. In this graph, it's captured the fragility of market concentration. On the export side, Russia dominates with over than 55 million tons, and hopefully we have a good season this year, benefiting from a competitive, so far, ruble pricing, proximity to key markets, and a state-backed infrastructure. The top 5 exporters account for over than 75% of the global wheat exports. Any distortion from port closure or rail congestion will evaporate globally. On the import side, Egypt remained the top buyer. These figures for 2024. On import side, Egypt remains a top buyer, followed closely by Indonesia, China. But beyond volume, what matters is the exposure. Countries like Egypt and Algeria finance billions annually in wheat imports using foreign currency that often constrained reserves and devalued currencies. This is the real problem that we have in independent and high dependency importers like in Egypt and Algeria. Importing wheat is no longer just a logistical challenge, it is a test of sovereign financial capacity, FX, and diplomatic alignment. The narrow supply and rising cost of hedging geopolitical risk makes it imperative for importers to revisit how they secure, insure, and finance their wheat needs. Moving into some of the global trends that I briefly hint in a while of, if you start with Asia. Asia is undergoing structural dietary transformation. And as urbanization and income level rises, wheat-based products are increasingly displacing rice as a daily staple, especially in Southeast Asia. This shift is most viable in countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines, where Western-style baked goods, instant noodles, and fast food creating stable commercial demand for wheat imports. This is the kind of shift that we are, in my opinion, underplaying. Yet, this demand surge collides with the trade volatility. So the problem mainly in Asia is not only about the availability of product, it's how they interact, who are controlling this kind of flow. So this trade volatility, if India, for instance, decided to impose export bans, that will ripple effect across Asia and even across East Africa, similar to China when decided for stockpiling reserves for all their strategic reasons. So what we conclude from this, what emerged as a region is a demand-strong, trade-exposed, and infrastructure fragile. The opportunity lies in building regional resilience from shared buffer stocks to optimize port infrastructure and digital trade corridors. In my opinion, Asia needs not just more grain, they need smarter systems. Our lovely region, the MENA. The MENA region represents, as I mentioned, acute or specific case of grain dependency anywhere in the world. Here, wheat is not just a food product, it is a political commodity. Bread subsidies are foundational for the social contracts, especially in Egypt, Tunisia, and Algeria. These programs maintain political legitimacy at the enormous fiscal cost and foreign currency exposure. Prior to the Ukraine war, over 80% of MENA's wheat imports came from Russia and Ukraine. The war fractured this dependency, forcing rapid diversification towards India, France, and even South American origins. However, diversification remained partial. Russian wheat still dominance, largely due to pricing advantages and favorable logistic via the Black Sea, and most important, I'm talking about here about Egypt, about the quality of Russian wheat, which is the most millable kind of wheat comparing to suit our needs in Egypt. Beyond sourcing, there are infrastructure and policy bottlenecks. So we need to make sure we are lacking the sufficient grain storage or port redundancy to withstand supply shocks. This is an area we need to address in Egypt and across the MENA in general. Looking ahead, MENA's resilience hinged on 3 levers: supply diversification with origin-specific financing tools. The modern aid trader should always focus about the new innovative financing tools. This is the name of the game. If you are familiar with the system here in Egypt, for example, they're asking for a credit line, at least the government, asking for a credit line exceeding 270 days. So how are you going to factor this in your pricing? To find a financing tool, innovative financing tool, it's crucial. Strategic reserves and decentralization storage infrastructure is another area, especially you have a very highly concentrated storage. Again, if you're talking about Egypt in the specific, you don't have this across Egypt. Maybe you have in the north of Egypt, close to the main ports. In upper Egypt, we lack this kind of infrastructure. But the most important, which is, again, was the main, the main headache for any government in Egypt, is smarter subsidy system. Smarter subsidies targeting to reduce the physical drag without triggering social unrest. Africa. It's always sunny, it's always promising Africa as the next growth and everything. And from the experience, and you definitely you have better experience than me, it's promising, but Africa is the center of wheat demand. There is no doubts. But the problem is not only the demand, but without the domestic production to support it, it's a fairy tale. The continent is expected to reach 2.5 billion in terms of population by 2050. Urbanization is accelerating, and with it, demand for wheat-based convenience food. Nigeria and South Africa already top wheat imports volumes in sub-Saharan Africa, but Kenya, Angola, and Ethiopia are rapidly catching up. Yet local wheat farming remains severely limited. In sub-Saharan Africa, the latest estimate, they only can produce less than 10% of their needs. So the dependency, if we are concerned about the dependency in Egypt, they have 90%. It varies, but this is across. Africa, this is very critical for the future growth of Africa. That imbalance forces reliance on imports priced in USD, shipped from distant port, and subject to international freight volatility. The result is widening food import bill that colliding with the diminishing foreign exchange position and mounting public debt. So it's a vicious circle. Africa path forward should be considered a blended finance to have the infrastructure, the right infrastructure in terms of local storage, milling, and processing capacity. Africa, when we consider Africa as a cities, not as a countries, which is, again, they need this kind of multilateral trade pact to consider as one block. This is the only way, given their size. Cultivation, climate smarter agriculture, especially in the Sahel and East Africa, where wheat cultivation could expand with investment in the drought-resistant varieties. The stakes are high. Without regional solution, wheat will become an inflationary accelerant and chronic balance of payment challenge for Africa, fast-growing economies and population. So if we move to Egypt, we already touched base about many angles about Egypt, but Egypt, again, in the wheat market, maybe in terms of the total global consumption, we only represent 2%, but again, given the subsidy system in Egypt, how far the people depend on wheat, it's very, very critical. Egypt remains the largest wheat importer in the world, not just in volume, but in the systematic exposure. Roughly 65 to 70% of national wheat consumption is imported, and over 60 million Egyptians are subsidized or entails to receive a subsidized bread. 60 million. So to give you the size, it's a sheer. They rely on the subsidized bread program for a daily caloric intake. This program is politically sensitive and economically enormous. Just to guess, that cost the Egyptian government $4 billion every year just only to subsidize bread. Not talking about fuel, not talking about electricity. The subsidies in general in Egypt consume like 25% of the government fiscal budget. The government's recent efforts to introducing a more centralized body, whatever GASC, which is we are familiar about, and then you have now they introduce a new body for unified procurement, what's called Mustab al-Marj. These are good efforts, absolutely. But the problem is that we have, it is a fundamental risk remain unchanged. Egypt's vulnerability is multi-layered, FX constraints, securing dollars in a country facing constant shortage of foreign currency, and most recently, the IMF conditionalities. Subsidy pressure, raising cost and inflation, pushing fiscal deficit higher. So we have, both options are difficult. So even if we try to expand our agricultural land, should be the decision to cultivate more wheat or to move this kind of investment into other, possibly more profitable grains. Unless Egypt build a mechanism for a dual kind of state-owned and commercial and private sector balance, that will remain a risk. The real challenge for Egypt isn't just food, it is the financial sovereignty in a context of food. So we might be better positioned in terms of farmable areas, comparing to, as Monica was explaining in the presentation, we have better kind of, our production was relatively stable, hovering the level of around 9.1 million tons over the past 7 years. Despite the strategic ambition to expand cultivation and boost yields and introducing a new seeds with a better yield, the reason are fundamentals. We have the obvious reason, again, which is geography again. Geography in terms of a confined space or resources. Again, we don't have land, enough farmable land or enough water. So whatever the efforts will maintain to be marginal. This raises a fundamental question: does it make sense to invest heavily in scaling domestic wheat production, or should resilience to be pursued other channels? For Egypt, the answer is not maximization, is optimization. Pushing production beyond its natural limits may lead to inefficient capital deployment. Instead, efforts should focus on targeting increases during high-risk global supply periods, improved post-harvesting and handling to reduce local losses. Just a quick number, we lost roughly 25% to 30% of our local harvest every year due to bad storage. Precision irrigation and yield mapping to get more of the existing plots. The import. Egypt wheat imports remain relatively resilient. So despite of the foreign currency shock from 21 to 20, and obviously the numbers showed here from 21 to 23, the volume to great level remained resilient. In Egypt, the system is a bit different because the government, or GASC, which is the centralized body to secure all of the commodities, is mainly covering or supplying wheat for the subsidized bread. So they have an annual kind of needs of 6 million. The rest of the imported volumes mainly from private sector to cover the private production in terms of whatever bakeries, pasta industry, whatever. And one of the materials mentioning in the presentation as well was very interesting. This kind of a new move in Egypt to move to be a flour exporter. So the producer in Egypt tried to take benefit of relatively competitive pricing of wheat that we received. And given there is a severe shortage of FX, so a lot of them moving to export or to re-export the wheat in terms of flour. How far sustainable remain to be seen. This is again to show you how the channels in the local market in Egypt, the import channels. Historically, it used to be balanced, so like 50-50 between the GASC or the government and the private sector. In 2024, we witnessed some change, even despite with the FX. What we believe, it's not about competing on who imports more, GASC or the government or the private sector. Going forward, I guess the whole pie will be bigger. As Egypt as a mandate to move to replace many of the experts, to localize industries. So wheat and flour industry was not an exception. So most likely we will witness a growing role for the wheat, for the private sector in the future as well. So as we are running out of time, so to conclude, grain markets today set at the crossroad of geopolitical climate volatility and economic fragility. This is no longer just a matter of supply and demand curves. It's a matter of national security, fiscal sovereignty, and human welfare. Reliance in a great trade now depends on institutional innovation, blended public oversight with private sector efficiency, and finally, global cooperation, because no nation can withstand the full impact of a trade fragmentation and climate shock alone. Thank you, and for your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Şimdi hiç vakit kaybetmeden süremizi çünkü biraz hafif aşıyoruz. İK Danışmanlık Kurucusu İsmail Kemaloğlu'nu dinleyeceğiz. Kendisi Türkiye tahıl piyasalarındaki mevcut durumu, hasat öncesi beklentileri, öngörüleri paylaşacak. İsmail Bey söz sizde, buyurunuz.
Hepinize merhabalar. Saat 1'e geldi. Salonda biraz boşaldı. 20 slide, 20 cümle yeter herhalde. Tahıl hububatı Türkiye'de konuşurken birkaç cümleyle hatırlayalım. 23 küsür milyon hektar tarım alanı. Yaklaşık 11.4 milyon hektara kadar varıyor tahıl alanı. Türkiye'nin toplam tarım alanının yaklaşık %70'e yakınını biz tahıl diye konuşmamız lazım. 11 küsürün yaklaşık %70'e yakın da buğday alanı. Toplam tarım alanı içinde baktığınızda neredeyse %35 küsürü sadece buğday. Yani Türkiye dediğimizde aslında tahıl her coğrafyada denize 0 metrede de 2000 küsür metrede de yetişen ana ürün. Buğday ile koyun, gerisi oyun cümlesi neyi ifade eder? Bu tabloda öyle değerlendirelim. Aslında tahıl, burada üretim rakamları devamında bir sürü grafik göreceksiniz. Uzun uzun anlatmaya hikaye yok. Türkiye'nin bir cümleyle tahıldaki genel dengesini özetlemek istiyorum. Tarihinde hiçbir zaman, çok istisnai dönem hariç, Türkiye'de tahıl üretimindeki kayıp %50 üzerine varmamıştır. Yani bu önemli bir şey. Ne demek bu? Bir bölgede işte denize 0 metrede de yetişiyor, 2000 küsur metrede de dedik ya, bir bölgede kuraklık varken öbür tarafta başka bir coğrafya, başka bir iklim, müthiş bir verim. Dolayısıyla Türkiye'de tahıl çok farklı coğrafyada, çok farklı iklim özelliğinde yetiştiği için bir Avustralya gibi değil. Avustralya'da bir kuraklık olduğunda %50 rekolte kaybı görebilirsiniz. Aynı sınır çizgidedir, aynı iklimdedir, aynı eğimdedir. Türkiye'nin böyle bir avantajı var. Rakamlara baktığımızda Türkiye'nin yıllar itibariyle buğday üretimi, bu arada biz HUBÜDER için tahıl arz güvenliğini tehdit eden faktörler diye bir yayın hazırlamıştık. Hani meraklı olanlar biraz detay bakabilir. Ortalama 20,4 milyon ton buğday üretiyoruz. 7,6 milyon ton arpa, 6,9 milyon ton mısır üretiyoruz. Pirinç üretimimiz 570 bin ton. Uzun cümlelerin buradaki temel altını çizeceğimiz çıktısı şu: Türkiye'nin buğday üretimi uzun yıllardır aynı rakamlar etrafında dönüyor. Artma ihtimali var mı? Yani konuyu uzun uzun konuşabiliriz. Benim uzun dönemli analizimize göre bizim Türkiye'nin buğday üretiminin kısa vadede 25 milyon tonlara çıkma ihtimali yok. Bunun için muhtemelen ekilmeyen arazileri, özellikle İç Anadolu'da parçalı dağınık parselleri bizim verimlilikle, teknolojiyle buluşturma ihtiyacımız var. Sulamayla yeni alan açılır mı? Biraz önce İhsan kardeşim, değerli genel müdür yardımcımızla da konuştuk. Sulama arttıkça Türkiye'de buğday üretimi artar mı? Hayır. Alternatif ürün imkanları çoğalır. Dünyanın kaç ülkesinde buğday sulanarak üretiliyor, onu da siz takdir edin. Buğday aslında kurak ürün bitkisidir. Öyle de bakmak lazım. Evet. Dengeye baktığımızda Türkiye yıllar itibariyle 30 ile 40 milyon arası tahıl üretiyor. 2 yıl önce 2023-24'te 41,3 milyon tona varan bir tahıl üretmişiz. Tüketim tarafa da bakın lütfen, kırmızıyla görünen tarafa. Genel anlamda Türkiye'nin tahıl üretim tüketim dengesinde çok bir sorun olmadığı görünüyor. Yani bunlar resmi rakamlarla analiz yapıyoruz şu an. Yaklaşık 37 milyon ton tahıl üretimimiz var. 11,2 milyon ton ekiliş alanımız var. 36 küsür milyon ton tüketimimiz vardır. Normalde denge birbirini götürüyor gibi görünüyor. Ekilişler de son birkaç yılda özellikle tahıla, buğdaya devletin pozitif yaklaşımıyla biraz artmış görünüyor. Ürün bazında baktığımızda üretim tüketimlere, özellikle bu dengede mısırın birkaç yıldır ciddi bir ekiliş artış rolü vardı. Ama 2 yıldır yaşanan süreci hatırlayın. Kamunun su kısıtı gerekçesiyle mısıra biraz daha fiyat vermeme, desteklememe yaklaşımı mısır ekilişini ciddi azaltmıştı. Bu sene yine onun sohbetini yaptık. Bizim üretim planlaması politikamızı mısır deldi. Çünkü artık destek verseniz vermeseniz de fiyatı 12 küsur lirayı bulan mısır çiftçi nezdinde şöyle oldu. 1960'lı yıllarda DPT'nin kuruluş sürecinde, biraz hani sohbet olsun uyanın diye söylüyorum. Çok dağıtmayacağım İrfan kardeşim, korkma. Devlet Planlama Teşkilatı kurulacak. Komisyonda tartışıyorlar, plan. Vekilin biri çıkıyor, kardeşim bize plan lazım değil, pilav lazım diyor. Dolayısıyla çiftçi diyor ki bize pilav lazım, fiyatı en yüksek hangisi ise senin planını bir süreliğine deliyorum ben diyor. Böyle bir espri var burada. Ekilişlerin yıllar itibariyle seyrini görüyorsunuz. Mısır ekilişi dediğim gibi son yıllarda biraz politika dolayısıyla azaldı. Burada şunu söylemek lazım, Süleyman Hocam da burada. Arpa ile mısırı mukayese etmeyelim lütfen. Mısır bir endüstri bitkisidir. Arpa birkaç sektörde kullanılan bir üründür. Dolayısıyla dünyada tahıl dediğimizde trende artan ürün mısırdır. İşte yağlı tohumlarda soya fasulyesidir. Mısırı bence su kısıtı gerekçesini de çok önemseyerek en azından ekilebilecek alternatif olan yerlerde ektirmek lazım. Yeterlilik oranlarını görüyorsunuz denklemde. Biraz önce söylediğimizde Türkiye'de buğday, arpa, mısır, ekmeklik, makarnalık olarak Türkiye'nin ciddi bir makarnalık buğday fazlası var. Bu yıllar itibariyle görünüyor. Biraz sonra bir slaytla onu bağlayacağız inşallah. Ekmeklik buğdayda da neredeyse %100'e yakın ihtiyacını karşılama konumuna yaklaşmış görüyor Türkiye. Türkiye pirinçte, bunu buradan altını çizilecek bir cümle daha olsun, üretimdeki zirve noktasına geldi diye düşünüyoruz biz uzun yıllar analizinde. Çünkü artık yeni su havzalarıyla çeltik ektirme imkanı pek yok. Kaldı ki su kısıtı sebebiyle bazı ovalarda sınırlama var. Dolayısıyla Türkiye'nin çeltik pirinçte üst seviyeye, üretim zirvesine geldiğini öngörüyoruz biz. Yeterlilik oranları burada. Peki ithalata bakalım. Şimdi birkaç slide konuştuk. Aslında genel denklemde baktığınızda üretim, tüketim bir arada gidiyor gibi. Çok bir sorun yok gibi. Ama rakamlara bakın 2018 özellikle söylüyorum. Burası kapalı bir ortam değil mi? Ben kamudan ayrıldığım yıl. Ondan sonra ithalat patlamış biraz buğdayda. Bakıyorsunuz 9.8, 9.7, 8 küsür, 11.6 devam ediyor. 2025 yılının işte ilk 3 aylarını görüyorsunuz. Türkiye bu yıllarda ciddi bir buğday ithal eder olmuş. Bir taraftan denklemde aslında genelde bir şey var gibi, uyum var gibi. Ne oluyor aslında? Türkiye buğday dahil değişleme kapsamında denge için mi ithal ediyor? Yani un, bulgur, makarna, bisküvi, irmik ihraç ediyor. Onun karşılığı buğday mı ithal ediyor? Lütfen bakın denkleme 2020-24 arası yaklaşık 7.6, 2021 7.6, 7.5, işte 8. Türkiye'nin mamul karşılığı yurt dışı ettiği buğday miktarı bu. Oysa Türkiye'nin ithal ettiği buğdaya bakın 13 milyon ton, 12.7, 13 küsür tahıl olarak pardon 15.7. Yani Türkiye aslında ciddi bir tahıl ithal ediyor bu dönemde. Sadece dahilde işleme kapsamında ihtiyaç için değil, iç piyasanın ihtiyacı için de ithalat yaptığı görünüyor. Buğday, arpa, mısır ekilişe baktığımızda bu niye önemli? Türkiye'nin belli bölgelerinde son 5 yıl ortalamasına baktığımızda ekilişlerde bir değişim var. Akdeniz, Güneydoğu, Marmara ve Ege. İç Anadolu'da artış var. Doğu Anadolu, Karadeniz'de artış var. Türkiye'de buğday dediğinizde %50'si iki bölgede yetişir. İç Anadolu ve Güneydoğu. Dolayısıyla bu iki bölgedeki ürün deseni değişimi Türkiye'nin buğday beraberinde hububat, tahıl dengesini belirleyen kısımdır. TMO alımlarına bakalım. Özellikle 2 yıl önce son birkaç yıldır gelişmeyi hatırlıyorsunuz. 2023 yılı 7 milyon ton buğday, ekmeklik buğday, 1,5 milyon ton makarnalık, yaklaşık 3.7 milyon ton arpa. Devletin resmi açıklamalarına göre 13 milyon ton tahıl alımı, 16 milyon tona varan stok. Hikayenin gerisinde hızlı geçtim. Temel sebep ne? Son 5-6 yılda hatırlayın Covid sürecinin etkisi, Ukrayna-Rusya savaşı, kamunun artık stratejik stok olarak çok daha temkinli, güvenli gitme endişeleri, gümrük vergilerinin 2 yılı aşkın süredir sıfır olarak uygulanması Türkiye'ye o yıllarda ciddi bir tahıl girişi sağladı. Buğday ithalatına vesile oldu. Dolayısıyla özel sektör hasata girerken de hem devletin tahsisi hem ithalatla zaten sonuna kadar depoları doluydu. Piyasaya girmedi. Bütün yük Cumhuriyet tarihinde görülmedi böyle bir alım. 13 milyon ton olarak kamuya gitti. Özel sektör ithalat ve devletin tahsisleriyle piyasayı yönetir oldu. Devletin kamunun TMO vasıtasıyla alım fiyatlarına baktığınızda genel olarak alım fiyatları tüfenin üzerinde. Bu aslında olumlu bir şey. Bir yılda belli bir sezonda üfenin altında kalmış ama genel olarak alım fiyatlarına baktığınızda tüketici fiyatlarının üzerinde seyrediyor. Türkiye Ürün İhtisas Borsası'nın son 5 yıllık fiyat artışlarına baktığınızda yaklaşık 5 yılda ekmeklik buğdayda 5 kat, arpada 5 küsür, işte mısırda da 5 kata yakın bir artış görünüyor. Son 1 yıllık fiyat artışlarını görüyorsunuz. TÜRİP'te %38, ekmeklik buğdayda, arpada %45 gibi artış var. Mamul madde ihracatına bakıyoruz. Çok kısa, uzun dediğim gibi soruları olan, merak eden, grafikleri analiz isteyen arkadaşlar daha sonra da bizimle irtibat kurabilir. Un ihracatı konuşuldu biraz önce. Gürsel Bey de, Mesut Bey de izahta bulundu. Un ihracatında düşüş var. Makarna ihracatında bir istikrarlı seyir görünüyor. Türkiye'nin bulgur, irmik, bisküvi gibi ihraçlarında aşağı yönlü bir trend eğilimi var. Türkiye'nin mamul ihracatını yeniden analiz etme ihtiyacı var. İhracat Genel Müdür Yardımcısı Tayfur kardeşimiz biraz önce konuşmada aslında cümleler içinde güzel şeyler söyledi. Yeni bir hikaye yazma ihtiyacı var. Bizim öngörümüz Türkiye'nin ihracatı önümüzdeki süreçte daralacak yönünde. Makarnalık buğday niye önemli? Biraz önce iki başkan kürsüye çıktı, söyledi. Aslında bu tablo bir cümleyle şunu gösteriyor. Türkiye'nin makarnalık buğday üretimi artıyor, makarnalık buğday tüketimi azalıyor. Tablolara bakarsanız bu da ilginçtir. Türkiye daha fazla makarnada ekmeklik buğdaya yöneldiği için makarnalık buğday üretim tüketim dengesinde fazlalık gittikçe artıyor. Bu da sektörün dernek başkanları paylaştı. Önümüzdeki süreçte analizi gereken bir konu. Un tüketimi, makarna tüketimi, tüketim eğilimlerini görüyorsunuz. Türkiye yılda yaklaşık 9 milyon ton un tüketiyor. Pariteyle çarparsanız 1,35 dersek Gürsel kardeşim, 12 küsur milyon ton Türkiye buğday tüketiyor demektir un üretmek için. Makarna tarafa bakarsanız 600 küsur bin ton makarna üretmiş. Orada parite 1,6 küsur civarındadır. Oradaki hesaba da bakarsanız Türkiye'nin ne kadar makarnalık buğday fazlalığı olduğunu daha iyi analiz ediyor oluruz. TMO'nun satış fiyatları ne oldu bu süreçte baktığınızda? Biraz sonra hızlıca toparlayacağız ne olacak ne bitecek diye. 2024 yılı Ekim ayından bugüne kadar satış fiyatları buğday, arpada %11-13, ekmeklik makarnalık buğdayda 11-13 arası artmış kaliteye göre. Arpada da %15 gibi ortalama fiyat artışı var. Bu önemli. Biraz sonra bunu analizini kısaca yapmış olacağız. Kepek fiyatları, Gürsel kardeşim biraz önce söyledi, bu çok çarpıcı bize göre. Sonuçta söyleyeceğimi şimdi de söylemiş olayım, tekrarı da olur. Önümüzdeki süreçte tahıl piyasasını bize göre hayvancılık yem sektörü belirleyecek. Un sektörü değil, önümüzdeki süreçte tahıl piyasasının fiyatlarını, üretim tüketim dengesi ve trendleri yem sektörü belirleyecek. Buradan neyi görüyoruz? Kepek fiyatlarındaki artış, yıllık buğday fiyatlarındaki artıştan daha fazla. Aynen Gürsel Bey'in dediği gibi kapasite daralması, yem ham madde ihtiyacının, talebin karşılanmaması beraberinde fiyat artışlarını da getiriyor. Fabrikaların dağılımına bakalım. Bir iki cümleyle özetleyeceğim. Dediğim gibi meraklısı detaya bakar. Güneydoğu Anadolu, kısmen İç Anadolu, Türkiye'de bizim sektörle ilgili fabrikalar belli bölgelere yoğunlaşıyor. Bugün ve önümüzdeki süreçte bunun çıktısı şu: tüketim bölgesiyle üretim bölgesi arasında mesafeler daha fazla uzamaya başladı. Aramızda işletmeci, sanayici varsa lojistik nakliye fiyatları toplam maliyet içerisindeki oranını gittikçe artırıyor. Bu da sizin için bir analiz konusu olsun. Karma yem üretimini görüyorsunuz, büyüdükçe büyüyor, üzgünüm. Yani hayvancılık daha tel örgü içinde, daha kapalı ortamda yapılır oluyor, kanatlı sektörü büyüyor. Türkiye'nin karma yem üretimi 30 milyon tona yaklaştı, %50'si tahıl kaynaklı arkadaşlar. Bu açıdan çok önemli, önümüzdeki süreçte bunun ne demek olduğunu daha iyi analiz etmemiz lazım. Burada detaya girmeyeceğim. Kanatlı eti, tavuk yumurtası, kırmızı et, çiğ süt üretim rakamlarının gelişimini görüyorsunuz. Evet, geldik bir iki cümleyle toparlıyorum İrfan kardeşim. Şimdi 2025 yılı hasatına giriyoruz. Ulusal Hububat Konseyi yine biraz önce söyledi. %6 küsur kayıp dedi. Bizim saha analizimizde şu anki durumda %15 gibi bir rekolte kaybı göreceğiz. Bundan sonra mevcut iklim ve olumlu şartlarda gidersek. Hasata girerken durum ne? Birkaç yıldır özel sektör ciddi bir mal almadı dedik piyasadan. Ağırlıklı devlet çiftçinin malını aldı, piyasayı da devlet besledi. Önümüzdeki hasatı ve devam eden birkaç yılı ekonomi belirleyecek. Faiz %45-46. Buğdayın aylık finans maliyeti, stok maliyeti, rekolte eğer bu saatten sonra çok anormal olmazsa ihtiyacımızı karşılamayacak. Hasata devlette muhtemelen, bunu devlet TMO artık açıklamıyor ama biz biraz yapay zeka, biraz da saha tecrübemizle söylüyoruz. 3 milyon ton gibi bir stokla girecek. Bu sene tarihin en kritik cümlelerinden biri şu: özel sektör sıfır stokla girecek. Türkiye hasata aslında toplamda eksiyle girecek. Bunu önemseyin. Ama özel sektör hasata saldıracak mı? Saldırmayacak. Dediğim gibi stok ve finans maliyet hesabı yapacak, faiz hesabı yapacak, 3-5 aylık stok tutmanın bir anlamı yok diyecek. Devlet almış bana %13-15 ile satmış diyecek. Dolayısıyla bu kadar ekonomik kriz sıkıntının olduğu, paranın en kıymetli olduğu dönemde uzun süreli stok yapmanın bir anlamı yok diyecek. Birkaç aylık ihtiyacını alacak. Devlete geçen yıllarda gördüğümüz kadar ürün gitmeyecek. Çiftçi kaliteli ürünü elinde biraz bekletecek. Çünkü üst grupla alt grup arasındaki özellikle buğdayda fiyat makasları artacak. Dolayısıyla bekleten bilen çiftçi bekletecek. Yem sanayi, bizim tahıl un sanayi tarafı taciz etmeye devam edecek ham madde ihtiyacında. Başka cümleye gerek var mı? Teşekkür ediyorum.
Biz teşekkür ederiz. Gayet güzel, toparlayıcı bir, hani küreselden başladık. Türkiye üzerinde noktaladık ki son slaytlar özellikle çok kıymetliydi. Çünkü İsmail Bey'in hem kamu tecrübesi, hem özel sektör, hem sahayla teması aslında birçok merak edilen noktaya ışık tuttu. Tabii ki net cevabı vermek herkes için güç ama en azından bir öngörüyü bizimle paylaştı. Süremizi biraz açtık ama benim adıma çok bilgilendirici, doyurucu bir panel oldu. Teşekkür ediyorum panelistlerimize katkılarından dolayı. Sizleri de dinlediğiniz için teşekkür ediyorum. Şimdi tabii ki bir aramız var. Soluklanacağız. Teşekkürler.
Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Ses 1-2, çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Çok sağ olun efendim. Araya gitmeden önce yüksek müsaadenizle bir sertifika törenimiz var. Sertifikaları takdim etmek üzere Humuder Yönetim Kurulu Başkan Yardımcısı Sayın Pelin Özer Yağar hanımefendinin teşriflerini arz ediyorum efendim. Ve ilk sertifikamızı da çok değerli moderatörümüz, Bloomberg ET Tarım Editörü ve sunucusu Sayın İrfan Donat alacak. Sayın Pelin Özer Yağar'ın elinden buyursunlar efendim. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Monika Totova'yı davet ediyoruz efendim sertifikasını almak üzere. Tema Vakfı aracılığıyla 15 ağacınız oldu. Bunu da bir kez daha buradan duyuralım efendim. Sonra bir toplu fotoğraf da alacağız. Ayrılmayalım lütfen. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz. Doktor Dimitri Railko buyursunlar efendim. Çok teşekkür ederiz. Sayın Hayitam Moneym, buyurun efendim. Sayın İsmail Kemaloğlu, buyursunlar efendim. Efendim bütün panelistlerimizi, sayın moderatörümüzü, sayın Pelin Özer Yağar hanımefendiden bir toplu fotoğraf daha hep birlikte rica edeceğim. Efendim şu dakikalarda ikinci katta Manolya salonunda Cuma namazı eda edilmek üzere duyuralım efendim. Afiyet olsun. Yaklaşık 1 saat sonra Kontrol Union sponsorluğunda tekrar birlikte olacağız efendim. İlk bölümü böylelikle kapatmış oluyoruz. Çok teşekkür ediyoruz ilginiz için.